Welcome back to my series on chess opening theory. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the knight e2 sideline on move 7 in the Mainline Winawer Variation of the French defense. So the French defense is when we have the moves e4, e6, d4, d5, and the Winawer is when white now plays knight to c3 and black plays bishop to v4, and the main line continues with the moves e5, c5, a3, bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, and then knight e7. And today we will be looking at the move knight e2. The theory discussed is also kind of relevant for knight to h3 as well, as they both do have a potential common idea of putting the knight on f4 and then going to h5. But knight h3 has never really been played at a high level, but knight e2 has been played very, very rarely. So one possible idea of knight e2 is to do this, like to hit the g7 pawn this way and create a weakness on the f6 square if the pawn comes forward. But the problem with this plan is that it is just very, very slow. It is just a very slow plan, and the best way for black to deal with it is to just continue with their typical plan of striking at the center. So if white now plays knight to f4, you just take, and you're just going to have your queen invade over here. Or if white takes back with their queen, you can develop with tempo if you want, and hit the pawn on e5, and there will be some very weak, isolated pawns on the queen side for you to get at afterwards. So overall, knight f4 right now, it's not so good. This knight h5 stuff, it's just way too slow. It's simply not really going to work out so well. Like, after knight h5 here, I think you can even just castle. I think I'll just double check there. Yeah, you just castle and you're safe, you're fine. You have this knight to help protect you against any checkmating attacks, all that kind of stuff. And you're getting ready to, do some nasty stuff in the center. So as a result, knight e2, it's not that great of a line, but it is kind of interesting. And if instead of going knight f4 here and allowing c takes d4, if instead of going bishop to d2 to just, add some defense here, then black can still go for, knight bc6 and still just add some more pressure over here, like this knight f4, knight h5 approach. It's just way too slow. It takes too much time. And for the game today, I actually chose a game that white won. There are kind of two main reasons for this. One is that white is a very, very talented middle game player. Like, not the most, white is a player who doesn't like a lot of opening theory, but is just world class when it comes to the middle game. Not only that, but black played fairly well, like the opening fairly well, but then kind of went a bit wrong later on, and we're going to see how black went wrong. And the other reason is the other game in the database that features this line continued with the moves. Like, I should just turn on the engine to show how bad things are. Like here, you're like knight g3, which isn't a losing move, it's an okay move, but black still just goes c takes d4, or, destroying the center this way. And then white went bishop b5 check for whatever reason. This is getting a little silly. Bishop to d7. White decided to trade the bishops, essentially helping black develop and solving one of black's biggest problems in this opening. And then for whatever reason, white played pawn to f4, and you can see from the evaluation that this is not really this other game was not really worth covering. Like, it's already -5 here, and black just has an easy game here. White has made a lot of very silly mistakes. But this is not what happened in this game. Instead, in this game, white went for a more interesting idea with, instead of playing knight to g3, like back here, white played rook to b1, which is an interesting move. In the game, black continued with pawn to b6, but bishop to d7 is a very interesting alternative suggested by Grandmaster Giri in his course. And then if white goes for knight f4 now, you can try this bishop a4 stuff. Like, part of the point of rook b1 is to just get the rook away from this vulnerable diagonal if the queen infiltrates. So bishop to a4 is a neat idea. And then if knight h5, now go for this c takes d4 stuff. And then if white plays knight takes g7 with a check, it's important not to go to f8 because the dark square bishop will come to h6 and basically hunt you down. Very scary bishop with the bishop coming there, and then queen probably coming to g4, all that nasty stuff. So then if white plays queen takes d4 here, and play bishop takes c2 with a tempo on the rook, after rook b2, knight bc6, and if queen goes somewhere to f4, for example, to hit the f7 pawn, you can just play bishop g6, and kind of just tie everything together, and this knight, it's kind of a little bit stuck here. So even though black's position looks a little bit funny with the king having lost their castling rights, the king is actually fairly safe in the center, and black is doing just fine, whereas white has a number of problems here. So this is a very interesting alternative, but it's not what happened in the game today. Instead, black played pawn to b6, which was fine. And now white played knight to g3. Black played c takes d4, c takes d4. We have queen to c3 check. And if white blocks with the queen, then this is actually totally fine for black. Black just trades, and it doesn't matter how white takes back. Black plays bishop a6, just getting ready to try to trade the bishops, or at the very least activating this guy. Getting rid of white's bishop pair is a good idea. Getting rid of the French bishop is also a good idea. So overall, this would, just be fine for black. This would be about equal. Black would have equalized out of the opening. So that's what would happen if, in this position, if white played queen to d2. But in the game today, white played bishop to d2, which is a decent alternative if you want to keep the queens on the board, though it does lose the pawn on d4. And basically, we've probably seen this idea before. You might remember it from my video on h4. Like, black has won this pawn on d4, but black has to be a bit careful because as white is, kind of pulling ahead in development. And basically, the queen is a potential target in the middle of the board here. But anyway, before continuing, I thought that I should introduce the players. So with the white pieces, we have the former world champion, Boris Spassky, who is one of my favorite world champions. He's just a very fun player and just a guy who really, really loves chess. He especially seems to really enjoy playing against Bobby Fischer. I always thought, his passion for playing against Fischer was always just something really cool. I think at one point he was even willing to, I think Fischer was going into jail at one point, or there was a possibility of going to jail, and Spassky was like, "Hey, I want to go in jail with him just so that I can play chess with him and stuff." And I thought that was quite passionate when it comes to chess. But aside from Fischer, Spassky, he was world champion from 1969 to 1972. So he beat Petrosian and he lost to Fischer, and he was known, he's still alive actually. He's known for being a very, very strong middle game player. He was one of the first great universalists. It's he was just really clever at figuring out what to do in just about any middle game. but he didn't really he doesn't really like opening theory so much. Well, maybe he likes opening theory more now, but he didn't like it so much in the past. I don't know whether that has changed, but like he would often play very interesting lines and very interesting openings just to try to get the opponents out of their preparation. So he actually played the King's Gambit and the Closed Sicilian. The King's Gambit in particular was a very interesting choice because it was still at a time when it's still considered to be a very old weapon. But he actually won a very nice game against Fischer, the very, very first time that they played. And I remember hearing that it made Fischer so angry that he spent several hours afterwards trying to develop a refutation for the King's Gambit, and that's where the Fischer variation was born. So overall, Boris Spassky, very, very strong middle game player, so that's why this game in particular is going to be interesting to us, because the 92 line, it's not so great, but it is interesting to see how a strong opponent might play it. Like the other game that features 92 is terrible, but this game, white actually played really well, and it was actually black who went very wrong. So I'm looking forward to showing this game. And with the black pieces, we have FIDE master Ingo Bruch, who is a FIDE master from Germany. And unfortunately, I could not find any more information besides that. And this particular game took place at a tournament in France. That's about all that I could figure out. I could not find much more information about this tournament besides maybe what the results were and who also played there. And more information about the players and the events can be found in the video description. And now back to the game. So in this position here, white's next move is more or less forced. Of course, like over here, black is currently threatening this pawn. White needs to defend it somehow. And white probably doesn't want to defend it with the bishop because black would probably actually be quite happy to just trade the queens and then maybe trade the bishops and all that stuff and go into an endgame. So white's next move was more or less forced. Play pawn to f4 and defend this pawn. And now here, black starts to go very wrong. Black played the move pawn to g6, which is just a bad move. Like, part of the point, like you remember earlier I was talking about this idea of playing knight to h5, hitting this pawn. Part of the point of knight to h5 would be to provoke pawn to g6 and create a whole bunch of dark square weaknesses in black's camp. So pawn to g6, it just made no sense for black to play this move. Like, the point of pawn to f4 isn't actually to push pawn to f5, and even if it was, like, black should just let white do that, because black is actually quite happy to take maybe with this pawn, and then put this bishop on e6, where it would just, hold everything together. Like, that would be a fine use for this bishop. We do see this idea in other lines as well. So pawn to g6, even though it's not losing, it does kind of throw away the advantage that black had. Like, black should have instead, like, there were a number of great moves that black could have played instead here. Like, for example, castling is a good choice. Knight to e6 was also a good choice, like, basically with the idea of freeing up the e7 square for the queen to escape to. Bishop to e7 was also okay. Like, at the very least, it's not creating weaknesses. Like, the bishop is a little odd over here. And knight to d7 is also fine. Like, black had many, many decent choices here, but decided to play pawn to g6 with, like, probably completely misunderstanding the point of f4. Because the point of f4 was not really to play f5, it was just to defend this important central pawn. But anyway, white now continued with bishop to b5 check, kind of stopping any bishop a6 ideas. And I suppose black could have blocked with the e knight, but black probably doesn't want to do that. because it would kind of tie this knight down a little, make it hard to develop this guy. So black just blocked the usual way with bishop to d7. We have bishop to e3, and now black made another move that was not great. Pawn to a5. The reason why I do not like this move, and also probably why the engine doesn't like this move, is just that it greatly weakens the b6 pawn here. Like, this pawn is now a backward pawn, and it's on an open file, so like, that's not good. This pawn's probably going to get taken. Instead, in this position, an interesting approach that black could go for, in fact, the only approach that would really give black equality, is bishop to a4, with the idea of pinning this pawn to the queen and getting ready to take the bishop on d3, like with a trade. So white should, of course, unpin that pawn, keep this bishop protected. And then after knight bc6, knight to e2, queen to c5, like another reason for queen to c1 is just to get ready for knight to e2, and then maybe like bishop to e3 or bishop to b4, you know, stuff like that. You know, the queen here defends the pawn on a3. And then after knight to c3, the knight hits the bishop, so the queen has to go back. And then basically, according to the engine, the best thing to do is essentially to repeat moves with a draw. But this is pretty boring, and this is not what happened in the game. But bishop to a4 is still an interesting approach, but instead we have pawn to a5, like black is really going wrong now. We have queen to c1 with the idea of just bringing the knight to e2, as we saw before. Black plays queen to c5, not allowing knight to e2 to come with tempo. White plays bishop to e3, winning this pawn now, since it is very weak. Black plays queen to c8. We have bishop takes b6, knight to f5. Black is trying to, you know, strike back, trying to get active. Like, bishop takes b6, won a pawn, but white was already down a pawn. White lost the pawn on d4, but white's pieces are much more active than black's at the moment. Like, these guys just are not happy, whereas this guy's pretty happy. And this queen's at least doing something kind of useful. It can jump out later. And this bishop is extremely happy, although it will probably be even happier if it got to d6 somehow. But anyway, black plays knight to f5, trying to strike back, trying to get active. White plays knight to e2. We have bishop to a4, so these moves, knight to f5, bishop a4, so far so good. These are good stuff. We have pawn to g4, forcing black's knight back. We have knight to e7, queen to d2, h5. Black's trying to improve their rook on h8. H trying to do something about this. White takes on h5. The engine actually prefers for white to play pawn to f5 instead. But, you know, this is pretty hard to see. This gets pretty messy here. Like, basically, if black takes like this, white can take like that. And then if knight takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, rook g1. And, like, this is very tricky. Like, basically, the idea is white would sacrifice a couple of pawns here. Like, white would currently be down 2 pawns. But white would win back some material, since when the bishop moves away, the rook comes down to c8. You know, all that kind of stuff. And even back here, black doesn't necessarily have to go queen takes c2, but this position is very unpleasant. Like, basically, all of these pawns are very weak. There's an immediate threat of queen takes over here. So overall, white would be sacrificing a bit of material, like 1 pawn, but white would have plenty of compensation here, and white would still be playing for a win. But this is not what happened in the game. Instead of pawn to f5 with all of this cool aggression, instead, back in this position, white just took on h5, opening things up this way. We have rook takes h5. This doesn't really improve the rook too much, just because the rook doesn't really have much to do over here. But at least the rook does have, you know, this target on the h-file. So white grabs another pawn on a5. White is kind of keeping things simple, just taking pawns, using their 2 bishops, having very active pieces. Black develops with knight to d7, bishop to b4, putting the bishop on a good active square where it's also supported and supporting this pawn on a3. Knight jumps back to f5 since the pawn on g4 is no longer there. White decides to trade now. Bishop takes f5. Black takes with the g pawn because taking with the e pawn would lose the pawn on d5. And white now plays rook g1, grabbing the open file, getting ready to do nasty things and maybe win this queen over here if black doesn't see it. Black, of course, sees it. We have knight to c3, queen to d8. Engine doesn't like queen to d8 so much, and I don't really like it much either. It's just way too passive. Like, part of the idea of queen to d8 is maybe to go to h4 and do stuff over here. But the issue with queen to h4 is that basically black can't really ever take this pawn because after queen takes back and rook takes, this rook will come to the back rank like this. And with this bishop staring at f8, the knight can't really block that. And even if the knight weren't there, we don't want to lose this guy. So queen h4 ideas, they don't really work. Aside from that, queen to d8 is just fairly passive. Instead, the engine prefers queen to c4. This is just a much better try, much more active square for the queen. Try to tie this queen down to defending the f4 pawn like that. But then white would still have the move bishop to d6. You know, this would be a very happy square for this bishop and all that. But this is not what happened in the game. Like, white's still a fair amount better here, but not by as much as what we saw in the game. Like, white would still have to prove that they are winning here. White would still have to find the win. So we have queen to d8. Black now takes on a4. We have rook takes a4. Rook to b3. I like this idea. It's just a very simple plan that white is going for. Like, this bishop is very well placed on b4, but it does block the rook, so why not just swing the rook over to the other good file and do stuff there. Very simple plan that I quite like. We have queen to b6. Black's trying to find something to do. Like, basically, if queen to h4 check, white just moves their king, and if you check again, just keep moving the king. Like, there's nothing for it to do. Like, nothing for black to do. Like, remember that this just fails to this. So, as a result, we have queen to b6. White now plays rook bg3. You know, getting ready to infiltrate on the 8th rank over here. Black plays knight to f8, trying to stop these nasty, you know, trying to stop this infiltration, you know, maybe give the king an escape square. We have rook to g8, king to d7, and here it's very important that white not win this knight over here. Like, if you want, you can try to pause the video and try to figure out why bishop takes f8 would be very bad. It's not immediately obvious, but white probably saw all this. Like, white probably saw the ideas that black would have here. It's not even necessarily a tactical idea, it's more just a strategic idea. Like, why is bishop takes f8 bad? I will reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1. So, one way, like one approach that black can go for here, like there might be multiple answers here. I can just double check that real quick. No, there's only really one answer. Like, basically, in this position, the reason why this is bad is because black can get a very strong attack. Very strong counterattack here. With rook d4, hitting the queen with tempo and eyeing, you know, these valuable squares over here. Here, like, white would have to move their queen somewhere, and, you know, white does not have many good squares for the queen to go. Like, basically, if the queen goes to here, then the rook will just, you know, like, you'll win material back that way, although you should probably take here first, just don't lose this rook, you know, that kind of stuff. And if queen to c3, then we direct this rook away from here to over here where the rook is kind of too far away to help. Queen b1 check, king f2, and then rook c4, and basically the black's attack is overwhelmingly strong here. Like, this queen, it doesn't have any good checks. It doesn't have any squares it can go to, you know, get at this king. And black's attack is just going to arrive first. Like, black can probably do this, and if the king goes to the g file, maybe going to g1 is correct. Maybe not. Like, maybe this queen can go somewhere where it can go here and, you know, fork the king and rook. But overall, black at the very least will have a draw here, because, you know, if the queen wins this rook, well, after taking the rook over here, black's queen can take this bishop over here, and queen endgames are just notoriously drawn. Like, I would say that queen endgames are even worse than bishops of opposite colors, because, like, with bishops of opposite colors, you at the very least kind of can figure out whether it's a draw or not just by looking at it, whereas with queen endgames, there are so many possibilities for a perpetual check everywhere that they can be just really hard to play. Just such a mess. Like, I remember Varetsky's endgame manual is kind of like, yeah, these are really complicated. Here are some examples. This is not fun. You know, kind of stuff like that. But anyway, this is not what happened in the game. White did not allow these chances for black. White instead went for a much simpler approach, which is just to hit this pawn on f7 and try to get in this way. Keep this bishop here. This bishop is doing some very important things here. It's stopping both the rook and the queen from getting in. It's very important that the bishop stay here. It's a very, very valuable defensive piece. So white played rook 8, g7, and then the ending of the game is pretty anticlimactic. Black played knight to g6, and white just took the knight for free, and black resigned. Alright, so a little bit anticlimactic at the ending. At the end there, I am a little bit curious as to what might have happened if instead black tried a move like, say, king e8 or rook h7. Even according to the engine, white should repeat moves, but that's a little silly. I think queen c3 is a cooler move. Just try to get in this way. And basically, according to the engine, black should sack the rook on b4, and the next best move is just rook to a8. And there would still be a game to be played here, but I think white would just be doing very well here. Like, queen to c5 is just a very simple idea that would probably work just fine. And like maybe even go for rook to g8 right now that the queen is here. Like, I think rook g8 right now is just the simplest approach. Although king to d7 might... Yeah, the queen is eyeing this. There's still a game to be played. It's still very interesting. Like, king to d7, rook here because you want to take this rook over here, but you don't want to hang your rook on g there. Take, and overall, there would still be a game to be played. Like something like this. And then what's interesting is that only queen b3 is a good move here. And, you know, white would still have to kind of prove the win here. But that's not what happened in the game. Instead, knight to g6, white took a free knight, and black resigned. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed. If you did enjoy, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye for now.